Hey guys, Coach Chad here, Quantum Leap Body Transformation Program. Today we are doing questions and answers. So I have a very long list of questions that you guys have submitted that we are going to answer now. So let's jump right into it because this is going to be a bit of a long one, okay? So bear with me. So here we go. Very first question. Importance of doing the mindset workbook. Yeah, it's kind of important. It's actually very important. In my opinion, it might be one of the more important aspects of this beyond actually getting your nutritional information in and following along with the appropriate nutritional numbers. But the mindset stuff is designed solely to keep you on task and keep you goal oriented. So you are attaching to your goal, you are understanding the reasons why you're doing this, and this increases your ability to change habits, stick to good habits, and set the appropriate mindset for change, which realistically is the most important thing that has to happen, because in order to have true long-lasting change, you have to have the appropriate mindset set up for it. So the act of doing the workbook is incredibly important because it keeps you on task. So maybe an extended answer to this question is also, how do you study the mindset stuff? So if you've done any personal development in the past, I think every single coach or every single program will outline this very simple principle that you need to continue to come back to your workbooks or your mindset training on a daily basis or as frequently as possible. And the whole purpose of this is through repetition of learning. So the repetition of a good idea, taking that good idea that's floating around in your conscious mind and impressing it upon the subconscious mind, which is what we're going to be getting into in the next future sessions here when we start talking more deeply about mindset, understanding the stick man and the concept of how the mind controls the body and how that interplay works. So the whole idea, though, is that you continue to keep that top of mind and you keep studying yourself. One of the coolest people in the world, you keep studying yourself, keep understanding yourself to a greater degree, keep understanding what you need to have for change to be implemented proper in your life. So we started off with things like, what is actual success? What are your limiting belief structures? What is imagination? How do you use your imagination? Then we got into goals. We recently did goal card creation, and then we got into the knowing doing gap. So understanding where you are and where you want to be and how big or how vast that gap is, and then starting to understand how you can begin to close it. These are the tasks that you were doing. And there's no way to do those tasks by simply reading and then writing out your answers. That's not sufficient. What has to happen is you have to keep coming back to it. Keep rereading, rewriting, re-listening to the videos and understanding more and more about those aspects of the mindset component. And you'll start to understand more and more about what motivates you, what keeps you ticking, and what keeps you going, and how you can stay focused on your goals, which is to probably most likely lose a certain amount of body fat percentage, which we've laid out. So how you continue doing that. Attached to that is also your goal card. You were meant to write out your goal card, write all of your information on as to what your goal is. I carry my goal card with me at all times. I have one in my vehicle. I have one, a couple in my wallet here, one a personal one a business one. And I write my goal on it, which then is attached to my bigger purpose and vision, especially my business-oriented one. And then I write little small words at the base of mine. So I have no problem sharing this, but mine, at the bottom of mine, I have the word strong, which isn't just physical strength, but it means something to me. And again, enthusiastic attitude. The third one, living better through strength, which I could do an entire half-an-hour video on what that means, but that's our gym Synergies kind of motto or affirmation, if you will, living better through strength. And then the last one is mind, body, and spirit, which again means something to me, but that's linked to living better through strength, strength of mind, strength of body, strength of spirit, and being connected to one's goals. So again, when I touch this goal card, it radiates through my body. When I touch this, there's an electrical signal that goes directly to my brain that says goals are important, and it brings that picture onto my mind of what it is that I'm doing, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and where I'm going. And it keeps me motivated to keep pushing towards that goal. So that's why the mindset stuff is so important. You have to stay on top of it, and you need to keep it just kind of floating around here at all times throughout the week. You keep the goal focused up here, and that way you stay motivated to what your true intent with this program is. So yes, the mindset stuff is important, and that is how you stay on top of studying it. Okay, now past the mindset stuff, let's get into some of the actual questions you had around some food stuff. So the very first question is or are egg whites considered a whole protein source? And the answer is yes. Of course, the egg white is separated from the yolk, so we have done not really processing, but we've removed a portion of it. You do lose the proper micronutrients, some of the vitamins that come out of the egg yolk. There's no doubt about that, and some of the nutritional content. But the egg white is still considered a whole protein source. Okay, you'll see past like a lot of like classic bodybuilding and classic fitness breakfasts were always one egg yolk or one full egg and 6 egg whites. And the primary purpose and goal of that was just to increase the protein content without adding all the extra calories that come with the egg yolk. So for people that are following a slightly lower fat diet, you may not be able to utilize the whole egg. So the egg yolk becomes very important in omelets as well as cooking and making some other meal choices. So short answer is yes. Long answer is there's a lot of reasons as to why you would choose those. But yes, it's a whole protein source. Next question. What are all the differences, or what are the differences between the different variations and styles of oatmeal? Interesting question. Interesting because I actually learned something really unique here. We sat down as the coaches and went through this, and I found my argument would have been that we have processed oats, which are then what you see in those little baggies, like the cinnamon toast oatmeal flavor, which has a lot of sugar, sodium, a bunch of additional ingredients to it. It's very quick oats, so it doesn't take very long to cook. You have that as the base level. Then you have rolled oats, steel cut oats, and then I learned a new one, the oat groat. I don't know if you have. It's fun to say oat groat, but oat groats. This one Holly brought up as a alternative, or not an alternative, but just another variation of oat. And when you get into processing of any food, you're just talking about how many levels of processing or breaking down or modification of that whole food there are. Now, what I learned was the oat groat is essentially the entire oat, the germ, the bran, the endosperm, all the pieces that make up and consist of the full grain. Now, what's been removed of it is simply the hull and the sheath and all that other stuff that comes in the whole plant. That's been removed in the process of, combining or collecting the oat. And its whole source is called a groat. And the next step would be a steel cut oat, which takes the groat and takes it through a processing of cutting it into 2 to 3 small pieces. And the reason that is done is simply for processing or cooking. You want to be able to cook it a little bit faster. You want a little more surface area. So that processing step of milling the oat through cutting it is what the steel cut oat is. So the steel cut oat and the oat groat are actually very similar. It's just simply that one more step of cutting. Then the next step down would be the rolled oat. Now, when you get into rolled oat, you're simply just taking that whole oat, mushing it through a roller, and it spreads out the surface area, which allows for ease of cooking. But traditionally in the full whole oat, or the full rolled oat, you have the whole oat. It's all there. So I really put rolled oat, steel cut oat, and oat groat on a very similar level. They clearly are on a different level on the continuum, but they're very, very close. So I would say they're all fine choices. The reason that you would choose one over the other is probably going to be based on palate, cooking practices, and flavor and taste. That's about it. Then when you start going down past the rolled oat, you start getting into all the quick oats, which some are still fine, but then you start getting in all the flavoring, all the additional additional ingredients that are put inside of it. And with that, you just have to watch the ingredient list and pay attention to how many ingredients are on there and go from there. Okay. But I would stick to mostly rolled oats, steel cut oats, and oat groats. And if I'm missing anything, feel free to add in your questions as a statement this week and we can bring it up. Okay. So that is your oats. Next one. Can I allot my calories throughout the day differently? And there were some kind of sub questions to this. So the quick answer is yes, you can do it however you like. One of the sub questions was, is it okay to skip breakfast? And my answer is yes, of course you can skip breakfast. It does not matter. Even though we have traditionally been told over and over again that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, that is not true at all. It all is just relevant to how you put your day together. So the other thing that comes into play with regard to skipping breakfast and modification of nutrients so today is people obviously ask the question, is intermittent fasting okay? And yes, it is. And if you're not familiar with intermittent fasting, it is essentially taking a gap of eating from anywhere between 12 and 20 hours, traditionally about 16 to 20 hours. I have tried all of these variations in the past, and there are some pros and some cons with regard to intermittent fasting, but you are welcome to do it. Okay. So when I did intermittent fasting, fasting, when I went to a 20-hour fast and only had 4 hours within a 24-hour day to eat, I had to have essentially 1 or 2 meals. Now, if I eat 233 to 250 grams of protein a day, there's a problem. I have to now have 120 to 125 grams of protein per meal. And if I'm only having one, sit down and eat 233 grams of protein is not easy. It's a lot of food stuff. So I would feel very bloated and very full after those meals. And it just simply didn't make sense for me to do that. I couldn't get all the volume of food in one meal, and also just simply trying to eat that much food at one time wasn't necessarily the best choice for me. So I went back to eating it within an 8-hour period, a 6 to 8 hour period actually, and that allowed me to have 3 to 4 meals. But I had to monitor my day, because obviously if I'm eating 4 meals in 6 hours, you're eating every hour and a half. So most people just don't have the capacity to do that. And then you're still full as you're eating all those meals, which is fine. But again, what I need you to understand is it's relevant to you. How do you feel? Just monitor how you feel, and what works best for you is fine. Where you look online, a lot of YouTube videos, people talking about intermittent fasting for weight loss. Remember, the number one goal in weight loss, or the number one outcome, is you have to have your caloric surplus. A caloric deficit. So if you have a caloric deficit, it doesn't really matter if you're eating 1 to 10 meals a day. As long as you're in a deficit, you're fine. There's no problem. Okay. So it just has to fit your style of eating, your preference of eating, and maybe I'll fit that in your day. Now, the next step in there, I've already mentioned protein levels, food volume. I've kind of touched on that as well. Some people don't like intermittent fasting because it makes the food volume per meal a little bit higher. Some people truly enjoy that. Up to you, however you wish to do it. The ratio of foods when you're skipping or moving foods throughout the day is important. So you of course don't want your breakfast to be straight protein, straight carbs, or fat, or really high to one. Try and think about just some common sense with regard to putting your meals together, or just some moderation and balance. So when you're putting your meals together, they don't have to be the exact percentage that you want at the end of the day. They can have variation within, but you should have a priority protein to every meal, your starch or your carbohydrate source, followed by your vegetables and your fat source on top of that as well. So you want to have a balance to your meals, of course, but how you put them throughout the day is truly up to you. You have to monitor energy levels, satiation, and your workflow throughout the day. And this is an important one for us that are busy or we have families, is that you have to make it match your structure of your day. So as an example, my shift with the kids is the morning shift. So for probably over a year, I didn't eat breakfast. I fasted through breakfast because it was just easier to get the kids prepared and not have to worry about making my breakfast. And then I was able to come make the rest of my meals throughout the day. But now I've come up with different plans that are easier. I have a very simple breakfast I make that takes no more than 5 minutes, and I can then have a chance to eat with the kids in the morning. It works for me. So again, that's how I do it now. But you have to make it work for your day. How you do that is up to you. Okay. Now, another variation of eating throughout the day I've played with in the past, I've done many different styles of eating, from paleo to evolutionary to carnivore to zone dieting, keto. When I did keto, one of the things I found when I moved my fat up to 80 to 85% of my diet is that I actually got a lot of GI distress. I could not digest the fat appropriately. I've done also intermittent fasting with keto styles. So I had very high levels of fat in just very specific meals. And my problem was I just got a lot of GI distress, essentially just getting diarrhea from the high levels of fat, which I had a very hard time adapting to even over a long period of time. So it didn't work for me. So the point being here is that you have to monitor yourself and you have to learn what works best for you. But there is no reason to stick to 3 meals a day or 4 meals a day, whatever works for you. Okay. Now, classically in the world of bodybuilding, it was always eat small, frequent meals throughout the day, 6 to 7 meals. And it turns out that the thermic effect of feeding per meal is no different if this meal is small or big. It's just relevant to the size of the meal. So if you eat 6 small meals, it's the same thermic effect of eating 3 big meals. There's no advantage to eating more meals throughout the day, none whatsoever. Now, just a couple caveats, of course, there's always rules here. If you're trying to put on muscle mass, I'm not a huge fan of intermittent fasting. I like to have more of a sustained protein and carbohydrate source throughout the day for energy level reasons, as well as recovery reasons from workouts and maintenance of muscle mass. I don't want to get too deeply into that. That's a whole half-hour video in and of itself. I just think the basic rules of having anywhere between 2 and 4 meals a day is ideal. Where you put them is up to you and your schedule, and you make that fit. Okay. So I hope that answers the question, but it's probably a more specific question within that. So if there is, ask it. All right, next one. Is it okay if I have more fat than carbohydrate in my diet? Simple answer, yes. I don't care the ratio of fat to carbohydrate in your diet. It does not matter. It's up to you. Again, an individual choice. There is no research that shows low carb, high fat, low carb, whatever, as in your diet makes any difference. Caloric consumption is number one, and protein sources and level is number two. So the rest, they just can be made up however you wish, and they can change day to day as well. It's not something that you have to be consistent with. All right. Now, my only point that I'll add, and I think I may have added this in the previous video, but I want to touch on again, there is something to be said from an evolutionary perspective with regard to your genetics and your background or your heritage as to how you can eat. Now, I wouldn't make too much of this. I wouldn't run out and try and change everything based on this, but let's use a couple examples. Those genetically over, I'm talking again like centuries and millennia, if you will, individuals that have a history of eating or of living around the equator traditionally handle sugars better, handle higher carbohydrate diets better, solely because evolutionarily they've been there's a evolutionary perspective for the way they have eaten, because the fruits and vegetables are highly, especially fruits, are highly available. So from an ancestral perspective, there is an evolutionary bias towards higher carbohydrates. If you look at certain groups in Africa and certain Scandinavian groups who have eaten or have drank milk and used dairy products to a very high degree for hundreds of years, people that come from those ancestries traditionally handle lactose better. The same thing applies to tubers and gluten and other root vegetables and things like that. When you come from a more European background, people tend to handle those foods better than others and have less intolerances. Then you get into the Aboriginal population or indigenous population of North America. You think about the background here, right? Primarily a hunter-gatherer population that has survived off the land, which is a beautiful thing, but eating, meats and very small amounts of vegetables and whatever would be available in the land, which primarily meant high protein, high fat. So eating of tallow and lard and different things like that from the animal sources, but also from the animal sources traditionally were a lower fat animal source of protein as well. So a fairly high protein, low carb diet. So there's something that you guys can experiment with, play with individually based on your needs or your background. If you want to kind of experiment and go that way, I think there's something to be said for that. I think there's something that's very powerful within the evolutionary perspective of your heritage. Okay. All right, next one. Should you monitor your sodium intake? Yes and no. You should monitor it from a perspective of how much are you actually taking in? And what I mean by that is you should probably be monitoring your processed food intake. If you're following the basic principles that we laid out at the start, focusing on whole foods, you will not have a problem having excessive sodium. You may have a problem having not enough sodium. So if you eat a whole food diet primarily, I would highly suggest that you actually salt your food. Okay, get a nice Himalayan pink salt or something like that and salt your food. You don't have to use a lot, but it's going to be for flavor as well as adding sodium to your diet, because you will have a low level if you're just eating basic whole foods. If you have processed foods in your diet, you most likely will be getting enough sodium through the processing that's added in. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, of course, the question that should come from there is, well, what sodium level should I be having? If you look on Canadian dietitian sites and look at the standards for within the health guidelines is what I'm looking for, sorry. It'll say anywhere between 1,500 and 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day for the average adult. Now, the problem is the average adult could be 120 pounds or me at 150 or 250 pounds. So there's going to be a level. So I think it's better, and this was actually coming from Holly as well. She was talking about the fact that you could take 1 milligram per calorie ingested. I think this is a very smart way to go. I ingest somewhere between 28 and 3,000 calories a day. So my sodium intake could be anywhere between 28 and 3,000 milligrams per day, which would actually be a little bit high from the Canadian recommendations. But again, I'm also not the average size of the Canadian. So in that case, I would be taking in a little bit more. Now, just for interest, I went and looked at what the actual numbers are for sodium intake and the average population in Canada. And it turns out that it's anywhere from a population of 14 to 30 years of age being somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 milligrams a day. So we're taking anywhere between 75 to 100% more than the daily recommendation in eating. Now, if you, again, I I would like to make the claim that everyone doing the Quantum Leap isn't the average Canadian. So you guys are probably lower. So again, basic rule, salt your food if you're eating whole foods, and especially if you're exercising. Otherwise, if you're eating processed foods, you are most likely getting the sodium level you need in. Most people are never worried about getting their sodium. They're more worried about, am I taking in too much? And that's something that if you want to monitor and look at, by all means do so, but it's not something that we are going to be recommending everyone do. The other thing I thought was interesting upon some research is that for every 400 milligrams of extra sodium in your body, you can potentially store up to 1.5 to 2 pounds of water, which then only showcases the fact that you have some daily fluctuations in weight. And one of the reasons would be your sodium intake. Again, nothing to worry about, but my classic example that I've always used is I really enjoy Vietnamese pho soup, which is a beef noodle soup. It's very high in carbohydrates because there's a lot of noodle in it. It's very high in sodium through the soup broth. And every time I eat it, I drink every ounce of the soup broth and eat all of the pasta and everything inside of it. So usually the next day I am up in weight somewhere between 3 and 5 pounds, and I lose it over the next day and a half solely because of sodium and hydration levels. That's about it. And a little bit of the glycogen levels from the carbohydrates as well. But it all just kind of evens out over time. So you just want to make sure that you understand that from a perspective of your daily fluctuations in body weight. Okay. So I hope that answers the question. Next one, traveling tips. How do I eat best when I'm traveling? And this is a great question, but it's also one of those things that is very dependent on how you're traveling, where you're traveling, and your eating habits. But I came up with a couple of rules I think that might work well for everyone as a broad answer to this question. First one, pack your foods. Okay, so plan ahead, which is actually my second point, is plan your trip. Know where you're going, what you're doing, and what your days are going to primarily kind of look like. It makes a big difference if I'm traveling down to California to a fitness conference, and I know there's going to be healthy food all over the place and lots of restaurants that I can go to that will be easy to track my food in, which is very easy in California. But if I'm going home to my parents or grandparents or back home to a small town, I'm going to be eating the food that my relatives are eating. Guess what, man? It's gonna be pretty nutrient and calorically dense because there's gonna be a lot of red meats, pierogies, potatoes, that kind of stuff, right? So when I know that, I can plan my day accordingly to make that fit. And you may, if you pack your food, not have to pack all your food, but maybe you just pack certain meals. So as an example, if you're traveling and you're staying in hotels, I found that for the most part, eating breakfast in hotels is very, very easy, right? You can order very specific things. I would like 3 eggs, a piece of toast, whatever it might be, or even on buffets. If it's a hot buffet, they have some basic food there. The quality might not be the highest, but you can hit your macros pretty simple that way. What usually is a problem is dinner. So later in the day, eating at restaurants can be a little bit more of a challenge. So if you packed your meals for that, that would maybe make it easier. Then if you do not pack your meals and you are eating at restaurants, then the next step would be to actually plan ahead the restaurant that you're going to be eating at. So you can look at the menus online and make your choice before you go. Because as you're sitting there hungry looking at the menu, many times you're going to make the wrong choice, and also you won't be able to track it. So use MyFitnessPal, look up foods and restaurants in there, and you'll find foods that may fit what you're looking for. Okay. Next one, if you're staying in hotels, book hotels with a kitchen. That's something we always do. That way, if we want to prep food, we can. We're not reliant on going out to a restaurant. We can do some small cooking and things like that in the restaurant. That might be helpful. Secondly, when we travel, we always stop at grocery stores to eat, not convenience stores or restaurants if we can. We stop at a grocery store and pick up whole foods. You can make your own sandwiches. You can buy some fresh fruit and vegetables. And depending on the grocery store, if you're in Calgary and bigger centers, you have whole food variations and farm boys and things like that actually have really great buffets in there of whole foods. They're usually very expensive, but it's a choice. Then if you're also just stopping at a grocery store, you can just pick up fresh meats that have been cooked at the delis and things like that and make little small snacks and meals. Okay, so you have a lot of ways that you can do that, but then you control your food intake. Next one, stay hydrated. Always pack a water bottle when you're traveling. We've discussed this previously. Have a glass of water in the morning when you get up. Have one before every single meal to control some of your cravings and eating. It'll help fill the stomach, which then makes a gastric filling. One of the things that gives you a sense of hunger or a sense of satiation to help you from not overeating. If you are eating at a restaurant, try not to finish your plate. Okay, that's always a good rule. Just try not to finish your plate. Just leave a little left over on the side if you wish, and it just makes it a little bit easier for caloric intake. I don't know what's the number we're on now, but another one would be don't skip meals. Okay, this is one of the worst things I've found is that if I skip dinner or lunch as an example, and I go from breakfast to dinner, by the time I get to dinner, I'm so damn hungry that I'll end up overeating, right? I'll have snacks, appetizers, whatever it might be, but I'll just overeat because I'm feeling very hungry and I end up making the wrong choices. Okay, last tip would be to exercise. If you can, find a place to exercise. Now, maybe that's not formal exercise. Maybe that's just a walk. Get up in the morning, go for a walk, whatever it might be. Now, this is very dependent on what you're doing for travel. But if you're stuck in a hotel room or in a car or something like that for an extended period of time, it can be very, very hard to feel good. And I know it sounds kind of silly, but you'll feel stagnant. You'll feel kind of lethargic and heavy and crappy. And when you feel that way, you traditionally don't make the best choices when it comes to food. So if you go for a walk, one, it helps digestion if it's after a meal. If it's before a meal, you have a time to be by yourself, a little bit of alone time. And also, it's just time to reflect. And usually when you're moving and you're active and you have proper blood flow, you just feel better. And when you feel better, you make better decisions. So you'll make better food choices. Okay. The last one, and one more, I suppose, would be depending on where you're going. If it's relatives and family, talk about the fact that you're doing something special, that you're on this Quantum Leap nutrition program and you're doing this and you have some goals. People will help you and want to be a part of that process if you let them. So don't keep it quiet. Just say, hey, I'm doing this. And then when grandma's trying to push on 22 different levels of serving for you, then say, hey, man, I got a plan, I got a goal, and that's what's going to be. And then it helps you stay attuned to it when you also know the other people you now are accountable to. Okay. So I hope that helps. But if you have some more specific things, ask them next week. All right. Next one. How do I stop eating when I'm bored? This is a tough one, but it's actually simple on paper, hard to do in application, of course. Now, my answer for this is simple. When you're bored, traditionally, it's just a habit that you have. Walk to the fridge, open it up. You all know what I'm talking about. You walk to the fridge, you look, you're not even hungry, but you're just looking in the fridge, okay? The best thing to do there is replace a bad habit with a good habit. This is actually one of the steps to changing any habit, is that you have to replace it with a good one. So if you're removing a habit, replace it with a good one, which is what you guys did last week when you were getting into your non-value added actions and your value added actions. You're taking your non-value added actions and adding a value added action. You need to do the exact same thing here. So in your homework for the individual who asked this question, this should have been one of your non-value added actions was, I always eat when I'm bored. So what can you replace with that? I don't know. Maybe it's reading a book, playing a game, doing, I don't know, whatever it is. Find something to replace that. That could be an actual action. It could be, again, your goal card, staying accountable to your goal card, which then keeps goals top of mind when you're having those cravings or you're having those issues where you're feeling down or you're just bored and you're kind of, you're shifting closer and closer to this way to making bad decisions. Then reiterate the goals. Maybe it's bringing out your goal book and going through some of your workbooks, whatever it might be. Okay. But you've got to understand that's traditionally just a habit that you have, and you've got to break it with something good. Now, as an example, I was working with a client last week that had this habit, and it wasn't around boredom necessarily, but it was just a habit of they would have dinner, and then before bed, maybe an hour and a half before bed, they just got peckish. But they always said they weren't actually hungry. It was just the habit to go and find something to do and peruse through the kitchen and find something to snack on. And what happened is they were always over that 100 to 400 calories because the foods they would snack on would traditionally be high sugar foods or high fat, hyper palatable foods. And what we had to do and what we did with them is we just actually off shifted their calories. They were eating 2 meals a day. We just made it 2 meals plus a snack. So we actually incorporated a small snack in at that time of the day, which then made for an easy habit to break because it wasn't really breaking a habit at all. We actually just incorporated the appropriate foods at that time, which meant the habit wasn't broken. We just moved the habit to a good habit of eating better quality foods that fit the caloric load. So that way throughout the day, they weren't finishing their calories at 5 o'clock and then trying to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. They just had extra calories that were able to fit into that. Something like that could work as well. This is where it's very individual and you have to work on your schedule as to how does that work. Okay. So replace a bad habit with a good habit. There's a bazillion ways to do that, but you've got to find the answer that works for you. Okay. All right. Next one. Do micronutrients matter with regard to, my caloric load? And the answer, of course, is yes. The easy answer to this, of course, is that if you're eating whole foods and good quality foods, don't worry about micronutrients. It's not important because you will have all the micronutrients that you need. You're not going to be missing anything. You will have appropriate caloric density and micronutrient density in your foods. Now, if you're not, and you have a whole bunch of processed foods and things like that that you're eating, then maybe you do have to pay attention to it. The problem lies the answer to this question is, I can't answer it directly because every single one of you is different. And there's no way to actually know if you need more folic acid or magnesium or calcium. The only way that you can know that is you need to go talk to your doctor and get some blood work done. When you get blood work done, you will then have more information on what you're actually lacking. And that's something you need to work on your doctor with for two reasons. One, it's outside of my scope of practice. And two, I don't know your individual needs. Okay. So I also believe this question was also linked to, do I need more of a certain micronutrient if I'm a female, or if I'm aging, or if, whatever it might be. And again, the answer is kind of yes and no, but the problem lies, I can't answer directly. So you need to go get blood work done. You need to get the appropriate blood work done with your doctor. Tell them what you're looking to do, and they'll be able to help you out better than I will. Now, on top of that, to extend my answer even further, again, if you're eating whole foods, you're most likely fine. Okay, but you may have specific needs. Now, there's a couple things I think generally we can touch on. So the first one is, we live in Saskatchewan, it's winter, we don't see the sun. Now, in my personal example, if I use myself, I walk from my doorstep to my car in the morning with my kids, and it's not sunlight out that time. I then go to school and to drop them off back and forth to the school with them. And then I very rarely see any sun after that. I'm stuck in my office. I'm stuck in the gym. I don't get sunlight. So I traditionally will supplement with vitamin D. And I think this is incredibly important to supplement with vitamin D. I do 5,000 milligrams a day. I use a day. We found through research that vitamin D actually has a greater uptake when you do bolus doses. So instead of taking 35,000 IUs a week, if I was to take, let's say, 20,000 IUs twice a week, that's completely fine, and it has a greater uptake of vitamin D. Problem is, I won't remember to do it. So I just take it daily with my daily supplement routine. The next one would be omega-3 fatty acids. I'm a big fan of omega-3 fatty acids in your diet as well as in your supplementation plans. And the reason being is that we know through copious amounts of research that omega-3 fatty acids are good for weight loss, are good for general heart function, as well as mental health. All of these things, there's a whole host of reasons why omega-3 fatty acids are important. The problem is most of us don't get a lot of it in our food sources. Now, if you are one of those people that eat a lot of fatty fishes and fatty seafood, you probably get enough. It's not something you need to supplement with. But if you don't, something you can look into. And of course, when we get into supplementation, I never say that it's a mandatory or a need. It's a personal choice that you have to make based on your decisions around how much money you want to spend on supplements, whether or not you believe in supplements or not. I don't really care either way. That's a personal choice that you have to make. Okay. The other two supplements that I would recommend, this one is not necessarily a health-based one, but it's around a performance and health, is creatine. Creatine is the cheapest supplement in the world. I think everyone should take it. There are benefits beyond just workouts. There's benefits for mental clarity, for health of the brain and function of the brain and memory recall ability, all those kinds of things. There's lots of benefit to creatine. And again, it's cheap, it's easy. So take creatine on a daily basis. If you're a woman, anywhere between 3 and 5 grams every single day. Don't worry about loading if you don't want to, you don't need to. For men, anywhere between 5 and 10 grams a day based on your body weight. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember the numbers of grams per creatine per body weight, but I could get that later. And then my final one is a multivitamin. Again, this one is up to you. I take a multivitamin, just a 1 tab a day multivitamin. And I think of it as an insurance policy. And I know a lot of people hate that, but at the same time, I look at it as if I am short something, I am going to get some supplementation on that front. And if I don't need it, well, then I excrete it. So it may just be wasted. There are multiple different research articles out there showing that multivitamins are not absorbed very well. Others say they are. I actually don't know where that stands. And I think if anyone says they do, maybe they have more information than I do, but at the same time, I use it as an insurance policy. So vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, multivitamin, and creatine. These are my top 4 base supplements that everyone could use. I do use other things, but as a baseline, I think these are pretty safe and effective ones that you can use that are going to be beneficial for your transformation process. Okay. But focus primarily on whole foods, and you got her made, my friends. Okay. All right. I think that gets through some of that stuff. Now, the next questions I had were based around MyFitnessPal. So the next one was, Can I change the units of the food in MyFitnessPal? Yes and no. When you go into any food in MyFitnessPal, when you go down and you look at the levels of it, you can put in like how many quantities of it are. Above that, there's also what measurement type would you like to use. So sometimes it's milligrams, 100 milligrams, cups, fluid ounces, whatever it might be. So you can change it, but it's all relative to what's in that one food in there. If it's not something that you're looking for, then you can't. You can only change what's already inputted into the data in MyFitnessPal, okay? And if it's not something that you want to use, as an example, I've looked up things like steak in the past and it's in fluid ounces. I don't know what to do with that, so I pick a different steak one. I go find a better product inside of MyFitnessPal. Now this links into the next question, which is a good question. How accurate is MyFitnessPal? Well, that depends. Anything that has a blue check mark beside it in MyFitnessPal has been reviewed by the MyFitnessPal team, so it should be an accurate source. Now the problem, of course, is if you're using ground beef, well, it depends on the ground beef that you're using. Is the high fat, low fat, whatever it is. So you just need to know what food types you're taking in, okay? But then the next step of it is MyFitnessPal accurate. Recognize all the rest of the foods that have been put in there have just been put in by people, just like you and I. That means that we are prone to making mistakes. So you have to double check all of these. I highly recommend you use the blue check marks and the scanning of the food to get the most accurate reading, okay? But you always have to double check it. I have a few foods in my pantry that I scan that it's not even close to what the actual product is. I'm not sure if they have a different product from that product line that they put in place of it or something like that, but you just have to be aware, okay? So just follow along. Another example I use, for a long time, I was tracking for about a week and I noticed all of my protein, carbs, and fats were correct, but my calories were always off and I couldn't figure out why that was. So I went through each one of my foods independently and I found that there was a BCA/protein source that I was using in my workouts that someone had added. It had the macronutrients incorrectly, but the calories were inputted incorrectly / weren't even there. And MyFitnessPal didn't auto-calculate it. So there was a mess up in my caloric expenditures at the end of the day. I was always short, even though my protein, fats, and carbs were correct. So you just have to double check and be aware. But then once you find those good food sources, they're always in there as your recent ads, so you can continue using them repeatedly. All right, next question was, is there a specific time of day to do my measurements? Yes, in the morning. After you do your morning body weight, you want to do your measurements, okay? Now, your measurement is done once a week. We have recommended Fridays, but you can use any day of the week, but make it a consistent day if you can. Friday morning, after taking your body weight, no food, no water, after you've gone to the bathroom, that's the time to do your measurements. Your measurements are done once a week and put into your progress tracker. Your body weight is taken daily and then averaged and then put in your body tracker or your progress tracker. Your proteins and your calorie levels are taken an average of the week and then inputted into your progress tracker. That's how you use your progress tracker and how you do your measurements, okay? I would ideally do measurements on bare skin if you can. We had this question come up last time that when they did their original measurement, it was done by myself actually, but with very tight compressive clothing. And when the person went home and did it without clothing, it was different. That's fine. I understand that. I should have caught that. I would adjust all your measurements to make sure they're consistent from week to week. That's the most important thing, okay? Now, I think I've hit all the questions that you guys had. Now, if I have not answered them correctly, or there's something you'd like a little bit more detail, keep asking them, because these are some of the best things that we can do, okay? Now, there's a couple of reminders there at the end that were pieces of questions that I thought were important to cover, and I think we have to here. First question was, are there any tricks for weight loss? Now, this wasn't actually the question, but there was kind of a subcontext. This question was, are there any tricks that we can use? The answer is no. And the reason is that your number one thing that you need to do, which is my third point on here, is create a foundation around the basics, okay? Keep the goal, keep the foundational fundamental principles your number one thing to attain. Most people get caught up in the nuances and the details, and they forget the big picture. And in this case, I have to use that classic analogy, which maybe a teacher of yours has used at one point. We've probably all heard this story. The teacher comes to class and puts a 5-gallon pail on the table, dumps a bunch of big rocks into it, and then asks the class, is the pail full? And the class, of course, answers, yeah, it's full. Well, I couldn't put any more rocks in. So then the teacher pulls another pail out from underneath the desk and pours a bunch of pebbles in. I said, now is the pail full? And everyone's shocked. Oh yeah, of course there was gaps. Yeah, it's full for sure. It's full. Then he pulls another pail out of sand, pours the sand into the pail. Is it full now? It's like, oh yeah, it's full. Yeah, there was more room. Yeah, it's full now. Okay, good. Then pulls a pail of water out, pours the water in. Point being is that all those little nuances, you can fill this up. There's always more things you can put in your pail, but if you were to start with the water backwards, there's nothing else you could add. The number one rule is start with the big rocks, your foundation, and then you can start piling things on top of it, okay? That's the basic rule of that story, but again, focus on your big rocks, focus on your fundamentals, those 9 principles. Don't get caught up in all the details because they're not important. You need to be absolutely consistent with the big stuff, okay? And too many times, and I'll use the example again, I do nutritional consults with individuals. I sit down with them the very first day. They bring their food log in and part of my language, but they're eating like shit. And their question to me is, how much caffeine should I take before a workout? Should I take BCAAs? Should I use omega-3 fatty acids? And if so, how much? These are all good questions, but they're questions for later. I want you guys to continue asking these questions, but I want to reiterate to you that the number one thing that you need to do over the long term is be consistent with the basics, be consistent with the fundamental principles of weight loss, okay? Hit your calories. Eat whole foods, reach for your protein goals, and prioritize that. If you do that, you will achieve success in the long term, which then goes into my last point. Slow and steady wins the race. Now, this program is called a quantum leap. A quantum leap indicates something massive, a big change, a big adjustment from a current status. That's great, but we're talking about 6 months, okay? So when you go back to that nutritional audit that we did originally, and you set up the fact that like within that process, we had you outlined at a certain weight loss per week. So let's say that you wanted to drop from 32% body fat to 20% body fat. You know, we can calculate how many pounds that is. And we did the calculations and we said that you should lose about 1.4, well, let's just say 1.5 pounds per week for an easy calculation. This is a 26-week program. We're going to kick off the first 2 weeks because we were setting things up. So let's say it's a 24-week program. Well, at 24 weeks, taking 1.5 pounds per week means across those 24 weeks, you will have the capacity to lose 36 pounds. Now, who the hell wouldn't be happy with that? The interesting part about that is it happened at 1.5 pound increments per week. Okay, so think about that. It's slow, it's steady, it's consistent. Now you might have a 3-week drop and then a 1-week up, but the average across all those weeks is 1.5. That is what you're shooting for. And what you have to understand, and we all know this through the act of procrastination, right? That if you need to get something done, all of a sudden, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. Before you know it, the day that you need it to be done is here. Do not let that happen with regard to weight loss, right? You'll have a bad week. Okay, I'm back on the wagon. Now, if you do have a bad week, you need to get back on the wagon. That's fine. But don't push off getting back on the wagon. Do it now, because every time you add an extra week, you're taking that week away from the 24 potential weeks. And if you burn up half of them, then your potential for weight loss is going to be very minimally, because especially if you're doing the big yo-yo, which most people do, they have a really bad week. They say, pardon my language, they say, fuck it, I'm going to do whatever I need, whatever. I just get a free day here, and they eat 4,000 calories in that day and they jump back on the next day. Well, if you don't account for that, then that 4,000 calories gives you 1 week of, let's say, 1.5 pounds of gain. The next week you lose a pound and a half. Now you're back at level. You're back at zero. So all you're doing is this. You can go up and down, but it better be on a track down this way. So at this point in time, right now, if you are not down a couple percent body points, then you are missing the mark. And I don't mean this in a negative way, but you have to understand that your goal is to be moving forward or down in weight loss. You must be. So either your numbers have to change or you have to become more adherent to the plans that we have laid out, but don't hesitate to get there. Okay. You need to put in your reflections for the week, and you need to be putting in your progress numbers so we know where you're at. But at this point in time, you should be anywhere between 2 and 7 pounds down based on the goals that you guys have laid out. Okay. And if you're not there, don't light your hair on fire. Don't panic. But damn it, get on task, get moving towards what your goals are. If you have more questions around that, you should ask them, put them in, then we can address them, okay? But I want you guys on task. Stay committed to the goal. Keep the goal the goal, Okay. All right. I'll leave it there for the day, guys. I appreciate your time. Stay cool. Have a great week. And I'll be in touch with you guys later this week with a little bit more information from your mindset and your nutrition guides. Thanks a lot, team. Stay cool. Bye-bye.